My parents refused to help fund my college, but now they want me to pay for my sister's lavish wedding. Am I wrong for causing family drama by refusing? I, 34 male, am a software developer, and I earn much more than the rest of my family. My mother is a retired music teacher, and my father manages the neighborhood hardware shop. I also have a younger sister, Catherine, who is 30. I haven't spoken to her in 5 years. This is primarily because she is a bad person, spoiled and entitled. She's been that way since childhood, and my parents did nothing to dissuade or prevent her from becoming so. I endured her conduct for a long time until 5 years ago when she invited her new partner to Christmas dinner. I was hosting that year since I had recently moved into a new apartment and wanted to do something special. Catherine, as usual, wrecked the entire celebration by making superfluous remarks about my house's small size and age. She claimed it wasn't even in a good neighborhood and kept bragging about her new partner, who happened to be wealthy and lived on a large estate more than 10 times the size of my apartment. I could not handle it anymore. I reminded her that, unlike her boyfriend, I had moved into my apartment and was paying all of the rent on my own without assistance from my parents, something neither she nor her boyfriend could say for themselves. I also told her that if she had such high standards, she might escort herself out of my house and never return. Unsurprisingly, she and her partner were offended because everything was true, and they fled. Since then, we haven't communicated. My parents have made numerous attempts to reconcile us, but I refuse to see her. The only reason I had a relationship with her before was because of my parents, but I couldn't take it any longer. It's been 5 years since our last conversation, and I recently discovered she's engaged to the same boyfriend she was dating back then. They're getting married in a few months. My folks foolishly insisted on paying for the wedding site and decor so that they wouldn't be surpassed by the groom's parents. I think this was a very stupid move on their side. First, they should have recognized Catherine has costly taste, and her plans would be much out of their price range. Second, they couldn't outdo the groom's parents, who were significantly more financially secure. I'm not sure what they were thinking, but they had already committed, and the wedding is only a few months away. With my sister's lavish preparations, my parents immediately realized they couldn't afford everything and asked me for a loan a few days ago. Despite having a positive relationship with my parents for several years, I had to decline. This choice is based on an event that occurred several years ago. I'm on Reddit now because I'm questioning if I did the correct thing. Many of my family accuse me of being petty, but I disagree. When I was about to graduate from high school and enter college, my parents informed me that they wouldn't support my college tuition or any other fees. They explained that once I had turned 18, I was on my own. I was surprised by this because my parents had always been quite supportive of me, so this seemed out of character for them. They went on to explain that back in their day, they had to fend for themselves after turning 18 because their parents were not wealthy enough to fund their costs. They believed that this experience had strengthened their resilience and independence, and they encouraged me to follow suit. They had not even set aside any money for my sister and me, insisting that we work our way through college just as they had. My subject was not simple, and I didn't want to waste time working while attending college. I wasn't sure I'd be able to retain my grades while balancing both commitments. Furthermore, college is expensive, and no amount of part-time work will cover the expenses. I suggested getting a student loan, but my parents were against it. Even when I proposed borrowing money from relatives and repaying it later, they found it offensive that I would even suggest such a thing. They informed me that borrowing money was against their morals, calling it pathetic. I recall having a lot of disagreements with them on this topic in particular. Finally, I was able to persuade my grandparents to assist me in obtaining a student loan, which allowed me to complete my college education. I was really angry with my parents at the time because of their stance, but I finally forgave them. However, this does not imply that I forgot about it totally. My sister never experienced this difficulty because she never attended college. She didn't think she needed to worry about it because she knew she'd either inherit dad's business or marry someone wealthy. That is exactly what she is doing right now. So congratulations to her for adhering to her plan. The basic line is that I recall what my parents said about borrowing money when I recommended taking out a loan to pay my college tuition. They flatly refused, citing their morals. Borrowing money, according to those ideas, should still be avoided. When it came to my education funding, they strictly worried about their principles. However, now that Catherine wishes to marry and have a lavish wedding, they appear to have conveniently forgotten all of it. I thought that was quite hypocritical of them, and I wasn't going to let it slip. They created a lot of inconvenience for me back then, and I honestly don't believe my sister's wedding is more important than my college education. If I hadn't completed my degree and received the grades I got, I wouldn't have the job I do now or be able to aid them financially. When they asked me for assistance, I reminded them of what they had told me about loans and borrowing money, how it violated their beliefs, and all of the other explanations they had given back then. They appeared surprised since I don't think they expected me to remember anything after so many years, but I did, and I recalled everything quite well. After I finished speaking, they had nothing to say and returned home peacefully. I thought that was the end of it, but then a slew of relatives started calling me, informing me that the way I handled my parents was incredibly humiliating for them, and they were furious about it. My parents were evidently telling everyone that I had changed after receiving so much money and was now hanging it over their heads, attempting to bring them down despite everything they had done for me. I didn't think this accurately represented what I'd done. I had merely fought against what I considered unfair, and that was it. As a result, I stopped speaking to my parents. If they honestly disagreed with what I said, they should have approached me directly rather than going behind my back and complaining to the rest of the family. I also chose not to talk with the rest of the family since if they didn't understand where I was coming from, I had nothing else to say to them. I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding, so I didn't feel obligated to contribute in any way at all. I haven't spoken to my parents or anyone else in the family in the past few days. I've been fairly pleased about it because I don't believe I did anything wrong. However, 2 days ago, my parents paid me another visit, and this time they were really upset. They informed me that they had been denied entry to my sister's wedding, presumably due to my presence. I don't see how I could have caused such an incident, especially because I haven't communicated with Catherine in any way. According to my parents, when they told Catherine they couldn't afford the wedding and wanted her and her in-laws to help cover the expenditures of things they couldn't afford, she went insane. Catherine began pressuring my parents to arrange the money in some way because, at this point, going to her in-laws and asking for financial assistance would make her family appear very awful, which she did not want. She was somewhat correct in that if my parents were unsure whether they could cover the total cost of what they had promised, they should not have committed to it in the first place. She's generally spoiled and entitled, but I don't think she was wrong when she said this. Personally, I believe she and her fiancé should have paid the entire expense themselves because his family is wealthy enough to do so. However, if my parents had committed to something, they should follow through, and Catherine was correct in saying that they made her seem awful in front of her in-laws. So, I believe she had every right to stress out. I told my parents this, emphasizing that I was not involved. I did not urge them to commit to something like this. They brought it on themselves and had only themselves to blame. At this point, I believe my sister's decision to cancel their invitation to the wedding was an overreaction. But then again, what did they expect of Catherine? She has always been this way, and they, not I, are to blame. However, my parents were not prepared to hear any of this. They said that if I had just helped them out and lent them some money instead of being petty and harboring old grudges, they would not be in this situation right now. I thought it was really unfair of them to blame me, so I told them to go, which they did. But they persisted, and now the entire family has turned against me, accusing me of being self-centered and cold-hearted. Personally, I do not believe I have done anything wrong. But anyhow, am I wrong for refusing to pay for my sister's wedding because my parents cannot afford it? Update 1. Hello. So, I have decided to avoid contact with my complete family, aside from my grandparents. Both my father's and mother's sides of the family are currently unified against me, which is insane. Obviously, my mother's parents are no longer alive, but my father's folks support me. So far, they've been trying to keep the peace in the family, but even they're tired of the drama. Everyone in the family has had disagreements in the past, but I believe their hatred for me has brought them together. At the very least, I am delighted I was able to help the family bond. But I've blocked them all, and I don't want any trouble right now. Someone in the comments remarked that the true reason they all seem to despise me so much, why they need a reason to oppose me, is probably because they are jealous. That, I believe, is a legitimate point. I don't want to brag, but I'm doing much better than the majority of my family members, and I don't think they can take it. Growing up, I never really took anyone's counsel. Most of them advised me to pursue a business degree and take over my father's store because that's where the future is, rather than spending so much time on the internet. And guess what? That is how I make a living now. Not only am I far more accomplished than most of my cousins, but their parents appear to resent me. It just doesn't make sense to me because I believe families should celebrate and share each other's triumphs. But this has never been the case. It makes me sad at times, but I can't help it. Some folks are exactly like this. I'll bet my folks are already loving the fact that everyone is against me right now. They claim it was my fault that they were not invited to my sister's wedding. We haven't spoken since they last stopped by to accuse me of damaging their relationship with my sister, which I still don't understand. However, my grandparents have informed me that they are not speaking with my parents either. Since my grandparents are on my side, it demonstrates how ungrateful my parents are. My grandparents had helped them numerous times in the past, but they don't seem to remember any of it. That makes me glad because I didn't help them when they came to me. I believe they would have conveniently forgotten about it in the future. They take everything for granted, and it's past time someone taught them a lesson, even if it had to be someone as terrible as Catherine. Update 2. Hi. A truly interesting thing happened yesterday. I couldn't share it here earlier since I was so busy, but Catherine came to see me after I returned home from work. She arrived at my place about an hour later, which shocked me because, as I recall, we had not communicated in the previous 5 years. We do not have a nice relationship. I was very convinced she was here to talk about her wedding with me since now that our parents aren't even invited, I assumed she needed money. However, she was wise enough not to begin with that. Instead, she informed me that she came here to apologize for what she had done in the past. She stated that she was about to begin a new chapter in her life. She was getting married, and she wanted to formally invite me before anybody else as a way to make up for her previous behavior. She said she regretted being a brat, but it wasn't totally her fault because our parents never reprimanded her conduct. As a result, she grew up believing that her behaviors were socially acceptable. Now that she is older, she understands she was a terrible person and is attempting to make up to everyone she has mistreated in the past. She believed there was no better place to begin than with me because, as her brother, I had to put up with her the most. I let her speak, and after she concluded her brief statement, I told her I was fine with it and relieved she had finally come to her senses and apologized. However, I knew there was more to come and waited patiently. Of course, she finally began to tell me that she knew our parents had been cruel to me as well. She claimed she had heard from other relatives that our parents had been calling me selfish, callous, and petty because I refused to contribute to her wedding. She tried to trick me by telling me that I was entirely correct in my viewpoint because, at the end of the day, our parents had never assisted me after the age of 18. She said that they were the ones who had pledged to assist her pay for the wedding. As a result, it wasn't my obligation to bail them out when they got into trouble, especially because we didn't have a nice relationship in the beginning. I could sense she was working up to something, so I waited for her to arrive. After I hadn't said anything for a while, she suddenly acknowledged that now that our parents weren't invited, they had withdrawn the money they had promised her for so long. She began yelling about how unjust that was, pointing out that they were the ones who had agreed to cover at least some of the expenses. She was too embarrassed to tell her fiancé that following her argument with our parents, they would no longer be providing anything. This meant that his parents would have to pay for everything. Finally, she explained why she came to meet me. She asked if I would be willing to assist her only once, pledging that she would be grateful to me for the rest of her days. She even offered to sign a contract or do whatever it took to convince me that she would return the money, ideally by the end of the year. She simply wanted my assistance right now to spare her the shame of having to inform her fiancé of the predicament. I found it fascinating that she was willing to commit to repay the money and even go through the process to make it official. However, I informed her that I needed time to think about it. Ultimately, despite her apology, we were still not on good terms, and our friendship was strained. I assumed she'd understand, but she turned out to be quite shameless. She said I was making things too difficult and that she wasn't asking for much, as her brother. That was generous of her, given that we hadn't had a connection in almost 5 years, let alone one approximating siblings. I had realized from the start that she was only coming to ask for money. Her apology was not sincere. I informed her that she was exactly like our parents, greedy and constantly looking out for herself. Of course, this infuriated her. She began shrieking at me, but I am not my parents, and I had no reason to tolerate her behavior. I quickly told her to leave my house because I would not tolerate it. She originally refused to leave, but I grabbed her arm and forced her to. She kept shrieking that she was going to call the cops on me for attacking her, but I didn't mind. Eventually, she departed. I was really upset about it for a long time, but now it just seems like a ridiculously amusing thing, and I'm not going to let it worry me. Update 3. It's been a few weeks since my last update. I assumed that because my sister and I were still bickering, the invitation she issued to me had been canceled. But today, I was pleasantly delighted to receive an invitation to her wedding. I didn't know how to make sense of it and felt strange about the whole affair, so I texted her. She didn't react right away, but after a few hours, she called me back. When I thanked her for inviting me over the phone, she was really rude. I decided to ask her what was going on because I was perplexed. She informed me she had meant her apologies that day and was sincerely striving to be a better person now. She had also arranged for the money on her own, so she no longer required anyone's assistance. She wanted me to know that she wasn't just acting to get on my good side because I was wealthy, and she insisted on meaning what she said. She also added that our parents had made her understand how much of a brat she had been in the past. She was doing everything she could to avoid becoming one of them. At this time, I decided to ask her if she wanted to invite them to the wedding also. She assured me that, contrary to what they were saying, she had never uninvited anyone. She was only upset with them because they had put her in a tough situation. Apparently, my parents knew what my sister wanted for her wedding. She had informed them from the start that her ideas were somewhat ambitious, and she did not believe they would have enough money to cover everything. Despite this, they were overconfident about it. It would be awkward for her to reveal to her in-laws that her parents were only talking and couldn't afford what they had promised. The fact that they hadn't even thought things through and were so determined to compete with her in-laws disturbed her. Because she had been ranting at them, they decided she didn't want them at her wedding anymore and effectively uninvited themselves. They arrived at that conclusion on their own, despite the fact that she had not stated or hinted anything. Instead of addressing her and discussing it with her, they chose to tell everyone else their version of the tale. I have to acknowledge that it is quite problematic for them to go about telling people that their children are bad while refusing to openly address the issue with us when they had the opportunity. Of course, after they've said such terrible things about us to everyone else, we're not going to want to work things out with them. Even so, they'll find a reason to blame us. They are continuously trying to play the victim. I'm delighted my sister is finally starting to see this. Catherine informed me that the rest of the family has not alienated her in the same manner that they did with me. However, she is still pondering whether to invite them to the wedding, given that most of them appear to be solidly on our parents' side. They've been less harsh with her, attempting to explain why my parents were right rather than directly blaming her. I believe this has something to do with the fact that my parents are too proud to apologize but not too proud to rely on their children in the future. Because my grandparents will no longer be able to assist them, they are most likely hoping to keep Catherine on their side by leaving that door open. That's just my theory, though. Whatever the case, it's evident they're treating Catherine differently than they did me. It's sad, but it's not unusual for me. At the very least, Catherine is beginning to see the reality. If she is truly trying to be a better person, I believe I am willing to give her a chance. After we spoke on the phone, she apologized for throwing a fit the other day and stated that she would be delighted to have me at her wedding. She believed that someone from the family should be present. I haven't decided whether I'll attend, but I'll wait a few days before responding. It's difficult to mend a connection that hasn't existed in 5 years, but I don't want to be the type of person who harbors grudges indefinitely. That type of thinking would only make me unhappy. I even discussed it with my grandparents, who said that if I decide to go, they will come as well. Previously, they weren't sure if they wanted to go, but given the circumstances, they believed that supporting Catherine is the proper thing to do. Update 4. I attended Catherine's wedding yesterday and led her down the aisle. Unfortunately, our parents did not apologize to her or reach out before the wedding, so they were not invited. She was really disturbed about this for several days before the wedding. She eventually reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to walk her down the aisle. She expressed a strong need for emotional support from others. I immediately agreed. Nobody deserves to be treated this way, especially by their own parents, for something so trivial. I thought it would be easy for my parents to emotionally cut me off because my sister had always been the golden child. But seeing this side of them, realizing they were too proud and egotistical to repair their relationship with the only child they cared about, was stunning. In some ways, they contributed to my sister's previous bad behavior. They never bothered to address her conduct, believing it was preferable to leave her be. It was their obligation as parents to guide her, but they did not care. While I don't believe it was totally their fault, they could have done something to prevent it and didn't. Catherine asked me to walk her down the aisle, and I consented. She appeared really grateful, especially given that the few family members she had invited had declined. Everyone appears to want to support my parents and participate in the drama. I was able to persuade my grandparents to go, though. Catherine apologized to everyone in attendance before the ceremony. Her fiancé also apologized to me for his behavior several years ago. Catherine informed me that she had been open with her fiancé about the issue with our parents. He told her not to worry about the money and that he would take care of it. That's how they figured it out. However, she almost broke down before the wedding, upset that our parents would not be present. Her fiancé, our grandparents, and I persuaded her not to let them spoil her wonderful day. I wouldn't say everything is ideal right now, but we'll work on our relationship and attempt to improve things. I truly believe Catherine has evolved as a person. When I saw her yesterday, it felt like she was being completely honest about her desire to start anew. Some people may disagree with my decision to forgive her, but I believe I am doing the right thing.